very happy to have her back. And without further ado, Dr. Nancy, Amanda, my apologies. I say, let's get going.
Okay,
there we go.
Great.
We've got several more people coming.
Yeah, I think some people may pop in and then we will just try to catch them up. Thank you for inviting me to do this. I hope that what we go through tonight is helpful to you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and try to get us going. And let me just can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect.
I am.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Just in case, if you're wondering what we're covering tonight, we are talking about working towards your diversity, equity, and inclusion plan for your PTA or your PTSA. So if this is the wrong presentation, feel free to find the right Zoom account. Let me see, here we go. Okay, so in case you were not at the last session where I collaborated with Dr. Sampson, I just wanted to quickly tell you a little bit about my background and why am I qualified to talk about this work. Again, my name is Nancy Hernandez. This is a picture of my family at my graduation, and my parents are from Mexico. I was born in the US. I am a first-generation college graduate. And I am bilingual, and I work very, very closely with first-generation, low-income, and immigrant students. And I also work very closely with undocumented and DACA or Dreamer students. For many years, I worked in the scholarship field. So I worked with students who wanted to go to college, helped them get scholarships, and then followed them through their graduations. I've also done parent engagement work. I used to work for an organization called the Colorado Parent Information and Resource Center. And I had the great privilege to work with Judy Kaufman, who taught me a lot about parent engagement. We had a collaboration with PTA back then and PTSA. So I am familiar with the very important work that you do. And more recently, I became the director of the pre-collegiate program here at UCCS in Colorado Springs. So I continue working with middle school and high school students. So I've done a lot of equity work, diversity work. I was an equity trainer with Dr. Sampson. That's how I got to know her. And so I will do my best to offer you what I know about this work. But before we get started, I think it's just important to do a little bit of a warm up. I think it's a good idea to just break the ice. And I know you all probably know each other, but because of the Zoom format that we can't see each other in person, I think it'll be nice to just get to know each other a little bit. And then review our guidelines for our discussion. Again, I'm trying to try and make sure that we finish right on time and we stay respectful. So let me start off really quickly by asking people to put in the chat, what is it, or to take a piece of paper and whatever you've got nearby to write. If you are comfortable putting it in the chat, you don't have to, but please answer for yourself. Why did you join your PTA, your PTSA? What keeps you committed? Because I know this work is difficult and sometimes it can really be stressful and challenging. So what keeps you committed? Why are you here today? I think making a commitment to attend something after your work hours when you could be with family or friends or resting, I think you're looking for something, and I'd like to make sure that I and I get a sense of what you need. And then if you have something in mind that you want to be able to know or do at the end of today's session, so I'll give you a couple of pauses there to write that down or to think about what those are for yourself. That would be fantastic. And then I'll go back really quickly to our ground rules. For me, it's just really, really important that that we listen, that we the hardest one for me is interruption. I was taught not to interrupt, especially when people are older than I am, or cutting people off is really, really difficult. And it's hard to do this on the Zoom because we can't use the physical cues of being in person when you see somebody wanting to speak. So we'll just try and help each other along. And the work that we're about to do can be very emotional and passionate. So I'll just ask everyone to be aware that the conversations we're having can cause a lot of pain, and it is not my intent, but I hope that we'll be able to just listen and respect each other and try not to interrupt each other, cut each other off. And if you need to step away because something has become too upsetting or emotional, please do so. And I'm always available after our session to process and to discuss anything that comes up during the session. So let me go back here now. Now that you've had maybe a chance to think about what brought you to our session today, what brought you to your PTA or your PTSA? Are there 2 or 3 people who either you want to unmute and share if you're comfortable sharing, or put something in the chat?
I'd be willing to share if that's okay with everybody.
Great, thank
Would
you.
that be okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Wow. I would say as a whole, one of the things that I've always wanted to see in organizations, especially since we moved here to Denver, Colorado, is one, not just for me, but for our children specifically, them to be able to see people that look like them in positions of authority, so they know that if they want to strive to be in higher level positions, it's something that they can do. Because if you never see people in those positions of authority, oftentimes, especially as children, you don't know that you have the ability or the wherewithal to do it. But also, based on my own personal life experiences. I grew up in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and there was always this stigma where I grew up at, and on the side of town that I grew up at, that Black folks were criminals, and we were out to do harm and things of that nature. And I wanna break some of those myths, because we're human first. And I think that's, like I said, one of the big reasons why I'm a part of the PTA, because I want to see those changes happen, but I want to be a part of those changes as well.
Thank you, Ronnie.
I'm happy to share as well.
Go ahead.
My name's Nicole Buckner. I'm the PTA treasurer at Brown International Academy in Denver. I've been around DEI work most of my career, primarily through women's groups at different organizations. I was in the technology industry for a really long time. So it's always been really important to me, but now I'm a mom of a biracial kiddo. So it's taken on a different look and feel for me, just to understand more what she'll experience throughout her lifetime. And we also just started a parent equity committee at our school and had an interesting meeting last week with a member of our community. Our administration handled it really well, but I think the more information and the more training some of us have, the better off we'll be in some of those circumstances.
Great, thank you. And I cannot see the chat, so if anyone would mind, just if there's anything in the chat, to please let me know and read it, since I'm not able to have multiple screens and check that.
Would you like me to read a few?
Yes, please.
All right. Sorry, I'm trying to find. So there was a really good one at the end. Amy. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties as well. Amy with Trevista PTA. I want to be involved with my daughter's school. It is super important to me to become a part of an existing school community, which is primarily students of color, and to help other white families to do the same, to not take over. And Karen said, join to learn about the school many, many years ago, stay involved because I believe in the mission and power of PTA. I want to help others be involved. So there's just a few.
Excellent, thank you. So I think we all are here because we care. Right? This is important to us, and we have to keep that in mind as we move forward. I'll just put out some observations I have about doing deep diversity, equity, and inclusion work. A lot of this I learned not in school, but through some board work that I've done with organizations that have pursued anti-racism work and diversity, equity, and inclusion work. There's a lot of fears, especially right now. If you're watching any of the news, there's a lot of fears and a lot of charged energy around what it means, and a lot of misperceptions. And so right now it can be a very scary time to be an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that must not stop us. One thing I know about DEI work is that it never actually ends. And because we can't see or know what the ultimate goal is, we can envision it. We can envision a world where everyone is treated equally, where there is social justice for everyone, but we aren't actually there. And so it's just a learning process. We're constantly uncovering biases that we harbor, prejudices, oppressions that have been hidden and are rendered invisible. And I think during the last session with Dr. Sampson, we talked about, who's invisible in your school, who's invisible in your meetings, who's missing at the table. For me, this work is about bravely reaching out and speaking out for all students and families, not just our own. Initially, our own students and our own families may bring us to the table, but when you engage in deep diversity, equity, and inclusion work, you realize in your heart that this is about helping all students and families. And when we pursue social justice, it helps everyone, not just the students most impacted. And I think it's very, very hard to keep that in mind because we see so many messages about one group having it better than another. Because we are always learning about our biases and our prejudices and power, which is very, very important, DEI work cannot be a checklist. I think maybe you've all had experiences where someone just wants to get it done, right? There's a sense of, all right, let's get a woman on the board and check off the box. Let's get a Black person into the school and check the box. And this is not real equity work. It's just window dressing or tokenizing. It's not about make sure that there's one of every single group included. It really is about a transformative work. And in a lot of, it used to be, it may still be the case in some circles, where we have a tendency to say, oh, if the parents would just show up when we need them to show up, and if they don't show up, it's because they don't care. And this is all coming from a place where we don't truly understand families and what motivates them to participate. This work is transformative. And for me, what I know about this work is that once you have been deeply impacted by observing or noticing an inequality, and it could be something that happened to you or you watched someone else, and you understand how deeply it impacts children, youth, and families, you are no longer comfortable with it. So I think you may have seen a lot of those bumper stickers that say, oh, if you're not angry, it's because you're not paying attention. And for me, it's, well, if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not digging deep enough into this work. This work is about expanding love and awareness. And I think if you are someone who reads a lot of social justice or civil rights work, you will understand how deeply rooted this is in love. And it's also very important that we all recognize that we all have ignorances and we all have biases. And for me, it's important to be okay with that. We are human. We are not robots. We are not perfect. We are learning, and understanding that we have biases and prejudices is the most important part of beginning to do this work. I think people who right off the bat say, oh, I am not biased. Well, yeah, I will acknowledge that I am very biased about lots of things. And it is important for me to keep that in mind, because when I keep it in mind, I can catch myself and stop myself from taking an action that might hurt another person. I think awareness leads to opportunities for education. And this is, for me, why this work is so important, because it's not just about book learning, it's about heart learning, it's about emotional learning, and it really is about understanding deeply how other people have been impacted by oppression and injustice in the world. So with that in mind, and thank you everyone for sharing what brings you to today's session. Again, my intent is to give you something that will be useful. So I want to start off with, you may be thinking to yourself, well, maybe my PTA or my PTSA, maybe we're not diverse. Maybe you've been aware of that and that's why you're here. For me, it's important to acknowledge that and to keep that in mind, because being aware of what your challenge is helpful. I like to say that when we are doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, we're always in recruiting mode. Keep in mind that you already know who's missing from your group, and it's always looking for opportunities to identify people who you want to invite to come to your group. And you also need to ask within your group, what are you doing to encourage and excite new audiences? It's very easy to say to people, hey, I have this very important work that I want you to do. And I think, well, how would I react if anytime someone asks me to do more work, my reaction is, oh, I don't know about this. I've got so much going on. So you try to find ways to make it exciting, to make it encouraging, to make it not like as much of a burden as we know this work to be. And it's also important to ask ourselves, how are we creating that welcoming environment, and how will the new people you are hoping to bring to your group be certain that they have a voice? Because no one wants to be brought into a group and be told that we are needed and wanted and then not be heard. And I'm sure you've all had experiences with this. So I may be preaching to the choir, but I just think it's important to put it out there. So a lot of this session is about an action plan. And there's a couple of things that I think are important to go through before you start the work of forming your plan and taking action. For me, and I do this in my work at pre-collegiate, it's what is already in place. Never assume that there isn't anything. We have this tendency to say, well, because I've noticed that there's this gap, it must mean that nobody's working on it. And I think that's the quickest way to make people unhappy with you. It's always important to ask, what's happening? What is my school already doing for diversity, equity, and inclusion? Can you check and see if your school has a Black Excellence Plan, which I know DPS has on their website, lots and lots of information about this. And this is a very important way to begin delving into diversity, equity, and inclusion work. You can also start looking at what is your school doing around serving English language learners? Because schools are required to follow certain laws around how we serve these students and their families. What about immigrant and homeless and foster youth, which many times foster youth and tend to be overlooked and rendered invisible. Immigrant students, especially in schools where there's not large numbers of them, tend to just be rendered invisible. What about our students with disabilities? That's another one where sometimes it's easy to just overlook them. It's also important for you to look at your school and find out what's in place to listen to and include students in decision. And because I work in a pre-collegiate program, I am a big advocate of, sometimes our young people have the most powerful answers to the work that needs to get done. And a lot of times we would do things for students without including them. And a student will tell you if what you're planning to do is going to land well with their peers. My best example is I was working with the city and county of Denver, and the city wanted to prevent youth violence during the summer. And I sat in on this meeting and I said, where are all the youth? And they said, oh, well, the youth aren't able to come. And I said, okay, what's the plan? And their plan was, we just need to do an advertising campaign to let the youth know that violence is not the answer. And I'm pretty sure that youth already know that violence is not the answer, and spending $1 million on a campaign is not really going to land well. My understanding of young people is back at the start of the pandemic, what they were saying was, we need jobs. Get us jobs. We don't want another campaign. We want action. So I think including youth is really, really important, along with including the families and reaching out. In some schools, some of you may be at schools where this is done very, very well. And some of you may be at schools where you're wondering what's happening. And some of you may be at schools where some families are reached and others are not. You kind of have to be a little bit of an investigator to find out what's happening, because some of this work gets privatized. There may be like 1 or 2 teachers who know what's happening, and then no one else knows, or there may be a little group who's doing something, but nobody else knows about it. So a lot of this is about connecting lots of different efforts going on within a school. So the next thing to do, and if you notice, this is kind of the process that one would follow if you're being an investigator or a researcher. So once you figure out what's already in place, then you need to start finding some data. And for me, there are 3 kinds of data. There's numbers, right? And schools collect lots and lots and lots of data. Numbers of, how many, what grade level, how old, gender, race, ethnicity, immigration status, language status, test scores, gobs and gobs and gobs of data. Stories, there's lots of different kinds of stories. There's a story of individual stories where one group or one student or one family stands out, one person stands out. The story of many, the collective experience of a group of students or a group of families. There's untold stories where the person or the group impacted just hasn't had an opportunity to share their story, or it's too painful for them to share their story. And then there's popular stories, which tend to be more like rumors or gossip. But all of these are kinds of data. And then there's observations. There's things that you notice, or that a group of you may notice within your school. All of these are important for you to begin to notice if you haven't already done so. You may ask yourself what data is available at your school, because there may be some things already there that you can take a look at. It's also really, really important to find out what's collected and used with an awareness of bias and blind spots. And what I mean by that is we may say, oh, we've collected all of this data on kindergarteners and what kinds of programming their families want. But if the survey instrument went out only in English, then you're getting a biased sample of what families might want at that grade level. If the if the survey only went out by email, then you're missing families who don't have email. So it's very, very simple. This is why diversity, equity, and inclusion work is so important, because we are not able to think of every single scenario that might impact the data that we're collecting or the actions that we're taking, simply because there's only a limited amount of capacity that your brain can have. And it's so important to have different kinds of people involved in the work so that you can be aware of all of the things that might happen. So as you think about these action plans, what data do you have and what additional data do you need? So I put in here some resources, and I know I'm missing the Denver Public Schools site, and I'll put that in the chat towards the end of the presentation. But these are some of the tools that I use when I'm trying to find out what's going on in a district or a school. And for pre-collegiate, I do this because I'm always looking for which schools have the greatest concentration of first generation or low income students, or which schools have the populations that I need to serve in my program. The National Center for Education Statistics, they have a really cool tool. If you can click on that link there, that you can type in the name of the school and it'll bring up all kinds of interesting stuff, like how many English language learners, how many low income students, free reduced lunch, gender, all kinds of really cool data. Obviously, the state of Colorado has this tool called SchoolView. It's a very robust tool. I will warn you, if you want to spend hours and hours and hours looking at data, that this is I try to use this one judiciously, because you can really lose a lot of time digging in. There's so much data there. Now, if you want to cheat, so this is my cheat for you, the Colorado Children's Campaign Kids Count. I met a woman there named Sarah Hughes. She's their director. She's their data director. She does all kinds of number stuff. So I got in touch with her because I wanted to know, how has the pandemic impacted Colorado youth? And I also wanted to know what she was seeing in terms of the most recent census. So she's a wonderful person. She gave us a fantastic presentation for the state. Now you may want to ask her to hone in on a specific region or a specific area, but she was very, very accommodating, and they also have a lot of really nifty handouts on their website that are much easier to read than the state website, which is very, very heavy in terms of spreadsheets and numbers. And again, Denver Public Schools also has their own data, and you should be asking your school. Now, some schools are very willing to share data with you and other schools are not. I'm sure all of you have your own experiences in trying to find data to just determine what it is that you want to focus on. Okay, so once you have your data, then you get to analyze it, then you get to make some conclusions about what you're looking at. And again, you do this with a researcher hat. Now, keep in mind, if you are doing this and your PTA or your PTSA isn't reflecting your full school, all of the populations at your school, you've got to tell yourself, okay, I'm getting a biased read. I'm reading this data from my bias, and that is okay because we're human. And you'll have to keep in mind that you may be making some observations or missing some observations because we are all limited just by being one person. Now, if your PTA or your PTSA is already diverse, then it's great, because then it's mostly about listening to how different people on your team are interpreting the data. So an example would be, this is very common. You'll say, well, the immigrant families aren't coming, so it must mean that they don't care about education. When actually, when I talk to immigrant families, they care very much. But in their country, it may be that teachers are given utmost respect. So you don't go to the school to ask the teacher to do anything. You hand your child over to the teacher because they are the expert, and your job is to just stay out of their way. There's a very different interpretation of, the families don't care versus the families are entrusting you, the educator, to do what needs to be done to get the child where they need to be. So as you're looking through your data, you're going to make some observations. For me, these are some questions that might help. When you're looking at the data, whatever it is, whether it be stories or observations or statistics, can you tell who's being left out? Are there some aha moments? A big aha moment can be something like, and this may be very common in some of the schools, wow, we do not have a single Black educator, or we don't have a single male educator if you're looking at early childhood education. These are big aha moments where you go, wow, okay, this is an easy goal. Are your hunches about what's not equitable supported by your data? So I think it's very easy to say, oh, there's some inequity here. And maybe there is, but can we check and make sure? Because there's nothing worse than going to a school leader or a school and accusing them of having an inequity when you actually don't have all of the data. Are there some new observations that you're able to make from the data? And again, who's missing? Who's been rendered invisible? And then I always want to have some positives. No one, especially if you're approaching your school leadership to collaborate with them, you think about how you would react with just only a laundry list of everything that's wrong. It can be very disempowering, very discouraging. So let's try to find some good, some positives, some successes. Now, in some cases, you may say there is nothing here, and that is okay. But as much as you can, recognize that the people that you're reaching out to are also impacted by all of the things that are wrong. And sometimes it's good to have one win that you can say, you're doing this really well. Let's keep this part going. Okay, so I want to just really quickly check in here. We have got different representatives from different groups here. And I just want to do a quick check of, there's group one. So group one would be, we found some data, we've got statistics, we've done our listening and our talking to people at our school. We've already made some observations about what's working, what's not working. That would be group one. Group two would be, well, we have some data, but we're not sure what we're looking at. And we might need some additional investigative help to narrow it down. And then group three, and this is totally okay, you may be saying, we need more support. We've got a ton of questions. We need more time. So check in with do you follow your gut? What is your gut telling you? Is your group in one, group two, or group three? And wherever you're at, that's fine, because this is a process. I do have some homework for you though, because I'm trying to line it up so that your last session with Dr. Sampson is a complete action plan. So you are in group one, right? You've already got your data. You've already made observations. You know that your group, your school needs funding for a new reading program, or whatever the case may be. You already know what it is that you're looking at. Group two. So if you're in group one, what are some potential action items that your group wants to take? Just for me, it's helpful to write these things down, because if you're like me, I try to keep it all in my head and it's gone. By the end of the day, it's gone. So having some written action items, potential action items, is good. Group two, so you've got some data. You have a bunch of spreadsheets, or you've listened to families and you've made some notes. You're just, what do I do with this? For you, your homework would be, what do you need to gain some more clarity? What can you do between now and your April session to make some conclusions about what you're looking at that could lead to some goals? Group three. So group three, you're still asking a lot of questions. You're not sure, maybe you need a little bit more guidance. Your homework would be, what questions do you have, or what challenges are you having to collecting data and observation? It could be as simple as, we haven't looked at any data, or we can't get any data from our school. What do you need to identify your next steps? Again, writing, this is your homework. And if you are, if you want to be the representative for your group and you want to share out where you're at, I'd love to hear. And again, if someone can help me look in the chat, if you want to share where your group is at and what you're planning to do next, that might help everyone see that this is a process. You know, it's not a race. It's okay wherever you are, because this is you still have time until April to move forward.
Well, I'm just going to read some of the chat. Trivista is a 3 because they are brand new. Falcon Middle School is group 3. Brown International is group 2. DCA group 1, Cole group 3. Craig, what's your school again?
Doramore.
Doramore is 2. And I would say Bryant Webster is 2.
Okay, thank you. So you see, it's okay. This is okay because this is the research part, and it's all part of the learning process. So those of you in group 3, I think we will have to figure out how to offer you some more support, how to walk you through some of the questions you might be having. Group 2, I think you're almost there. You know, we need to figure out what's your data. Sometimes it's helpful to talk about what you're observing with other people so that you can get to that gut sense that tells you, okay, I think we're on the right track. And then group 1, I think this next part may be helpful for you. So hang in there. We'll try and make sure that everybody has something so that you can move forward for April. Okay, so once we get past that phase, and again, we're not going to leave you hanging. We'll try and figure out what you need to keep moving forward. So once you've made some observations and you've talked with your group about what you can do, then you get to the part where we got to pick some goals. Right? And this is something that I use myself. I like to pick 3 goals and only 3 goals, because in your mind, I think it's maybe 4. I mean, some people it's 4. But once you start making more than 3 or 4 goals, it becomes really intimidating and really hard to move forward. And I recommend, when you're looking at your list of actions, pick one easy goal. Be nice to yourself. Be kind to your group. Pick one easy goal with a super short deadline. That way you have a win. Everyone likes to have a success because that makes you feel confident and it makes you feel like you've accomplished something. Then pick one that's a little bit harder, like maybe a year out, school year, if you want to think about school years. And then your stretch goal is going to be the one that's going to take several years. Okay. Use your data strategically. For example, so how do the numbers or lack of numbers support your goal? You say, okay, at our school, we need to have more diverse educators or more diverse staff. And how, if you were going to the principal, the school leadership, how would you confirm that this is in fact something that needs to happen? You'd use your numbers. Stories, how do the stories or lack of the stories support your goals? This one can be something like, well, we do all of these great things for this group of families, but we don't do anything for our families who may be struggling to be housed, to be homed. And we don't even have stories about them. So what can we do to support them? And
Can I
again,
ask a quick question, please, Ms.
sure.
Hernandez?
Yeah.
So I was looking at the first part, and you were talking about goals and things of that nature, and then you mentioned something about, you know, not having diverse teaching staff and things of that nature. And I know in the first one that I put, one of the things that we need to work on is not just diverse teaching staff, but a diverse student body. And, that's something that I've been there for 13 years now, and that's something that I think since I've been there, I've been trying to help them work on. And I think we're finally at a space where we're beginning to get there. But I think with some of the things that you're giving us information on and data on, it really helps to know what things can happen to push us over to the finish line. Which,
Yeah.
of course, you said there's never really a finish line, but you understand what I'm saying, I hope.
Yes, I do. And I think you have picked a system goal, which is several years out and requires collaborative effort, because it is, and in fact, I was just talking 2 nights ago about segregation in Denver public schools and how our students, there's been multiple studies about how the entire district continues to be segregated, and how that is harmful to students, how that is harmful for future generations, and what is being done about it. So
Yeah.
some of your goals are going to require multiple partnerships.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the segregation piece, it's really interesting that you say that, because a lot of it is not just systemic segregation, but sometimes it's self-segregation as well.
Right.
If you go to different classrooms and you see, I remember when my kids were in elementary school, they had high strides and they had progressive. And high strides were the kids that were considered, I guess, gifted, if you will. And progressive were the kids that were considered regular, if there's any such thing as a regular kid. And so I just think that's interesting that you talk about it from that perspective, because it was a glaring example of how we segregate children.
It is.
Systems.
Yeah. And what's sad about that is, if you ask the young students, what does it mean? What do those 2 terms mean? I guarantee you that they will know that one group is for the quote unquote smarter kids and one group is not. And this is why I think including youth in some of this work is so important, because here we are trying to sugarcoat what is basically a categorization of students. And I think you can turn this into a really rich conversation about how quickly would you dismantle that particular structure if the adults listened to the young people and understood how this is impacting them. And that is actually a great segue into, that's an example of how something like that leads to deeper or increased diversity, equity, and inclusion, because you're starting with, we want a more diverse student body. Well, by listening to the youth, you're doing it you're dismantling that system in multiple ways. That's an excellent example. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, we're gonna get stuck. This is difficult work and there's so many ways to get stuck. So I'll try and help provide some tips to get you unstuck. And you could be in a group that's stuck right now because you have a lot of data and you're not sure what to do. So hopefully this will help. First is, sometimes we can't agree on what to do, right? Or we're stuck on trying to decide what to prioritize. For me, just keep in mind that inaction is the best way to maintain the status quo. So if you're stuck because you can't agree on what to do, just tell yourselves, okay, what in fact is happening here is we're maintaining the status quo. The longer that we continue to disagree on what to do or what's the best way to do something, it's the longer that you perpetuate whatever that inequality is. Small actions are better than no action. So again, if your group is saying, well, this is we want the perfect solution, well, just pick one thing. Some action is better than no action. Imperfect actions are expected. We are human. We are not perfect. There is no perfect way to do this DEI work because it's transformative. So give yourself some grace, give your group some grace. If you're arguing about what to do, then switch it so that you're arguing about what's the best what's the best that we can do with what we have, and what's the smallest step that we can move forward. And I like to say, if the people are not, when you make this decision about what to do, and there are people who are not present there, and they were given an opportunity to decide what to do, then they don't get to derail what the rest of the group has decided to do to move forward. And because you will get some people who will say, well, who decided this when I was gone? And as long as you provide ways for them to give the input, right? So not just make sure that, you know, they're kept informed, they get a chance to email or call or discuss. But once you've made that decision, then if you were not there and you didn't say anything, then you don't get to decide, you don't get to derail the work. This is like a bit of a consensus building model. Because otherwise you're always going to get stuck with people saying, but that's not the best way, or that's not what I agree on. We all have to, this is what consensus work is. You have to not stand in the way of whatever the action is, and keep in mind that the action may not be perfect, and that is okay. Because what we want is to get away from inertia and from the status quo. Fear, we get trapped by fear. Fear is super powerful. We're so afraid of doing the wrong thing, of saying the wrong thing. We're so afraid of one group having an advantage over another. Like, oh, if so-and-so gets a bigger slice of the pie, that means that there's less pie for me. And I think I mentioned it, or Dr. Sampson mentioned that at the last training. Well, then let's just make more pie. Right? And for me, I like to say, well, love grows. Love isn't limited to one person or one action. It grows. You are part of this group because, and I'm just saying this because you all want to act bravely and collaboratively. Right? People don't come to a group like PTSA or PTA because you're making money, right? Or because you're going to become famous. You do it because you are committed to children, to education. It can start with your own children and it will expand from there. And this is something that comes up a lot. I work with the innovation program here at UCCS, and they talk about how to teach ourselves to accept failure and imperfection. So, and it's very, very common in our culture, in the US culture, Western culture in general, that we want everything to be perfect. And if we don't have the perfect answer or the right answer, we're so afraid to speak up or say something. And we've got to get away from that. With diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not perfect because it's ever evolving and it's transformative. Let's not be afraid of the failure or the imperfection. I tell my team, I'm not going to get it right, and you can tell me if I didn't get it right, but I just want to keep trying. We act on behalf and with all the students and families. And again, and I say this to myself, it's not just about my students. It's about the other students that get left behind when we don't speak up. I think the fear, this is what's happening right now. People are so afraid. They're so afraid. Oh, if we make things equitable for Latinos or for Black people or for women, then where's that? That means there's going to be less for me. I'm going to lose something. And that's not what it's about. But you've got a lot of people who are very angry and very afraid about this right now. Okay, so here's a couple of considerations. How are you going to talk about your action plan once you have your action plan? So remember that your next meeting with Dr. Sampson in April, I would strongly encourage your group to put something down, put something in writing. It's okay if it's not finished. It's okay if it's not pretty. Just if it's whatever you've got, dry erase board, something you wrote on a notepad and took a picture of it, whatever you've got, bring that. Be thinking about how are you going to talk about this plan, right? What's your elevator pitch? What's your elevator speech for your plan? Everyone in your group should be outspoken about it. It shouldn't reside with just the 2 people who decided that they wanted to pursue DEI work. It's not just the job of the DEI person to do this work. It's everybody's work, and everybody should be able to talk about what your action plan is. That's why it's so cool to pick only 3, because 3 is easy to memorize. Again, it's not fair to disrespect the plan once you've already agreed to it. Right? And this happens in groups all the time. You've got the people who, like, first they're on board and then all of a sudden they change their mind. So it's not okay to diss the plan once you've already agreed to it. You may have to compromise. So some of you may be coming to your school and saying, we want a more diverse student body, and they'll say, well, but we need this first. So there's going to be some areas of compromise, but there's going to be deal breakers. So what are, in your group, discuss what are your deal breakers? What is the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you are not willing to compromise on?
I just want to interject, Dr. Hernandez, a reminder for everyone that it is the board of directors of the PTA that approves the work plan. So make sure that you've included, if your committee doesn't have any board members on that committee, be sure to bring board members in so that you do get approval of that plan. Be very careful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who's going to be accountable, right? And how are you going to make sure that those individuals who are saying they're going to meet with the principal or reach out to a group of families to invite them, or how are you going to hold them accountable? There can be 1 or 2 or several leaders, but again, this is group work, and this is the hard part. This happens a lot at colleges and universities. Everyone says we're going to hire a diversity, equity, and inclusion coordinator, and then everybody says, well, that's their job, not my job. That doesn't work. This has to be owned collaboratively. And what else do you need to get to an action plan? So your goal is to have something to bring for your April meeting. And it's okay if it's not beautiful and perfect. We're not looking for that. Okay, so here's some examples. And hopefully this will help kind of imagine what this could look like. So every group is different. And so we've got a bunch of groups and you're all in different parts of this work. So what works for one group or one school may not work for another. So let's say that in your group, you observed none of the immigrant families come to our meetings or come to school meetings. Here's a couple of goals. 1, reach the Title I coordinator. Maybe the Title I coordinator is successful at getting the families to come, and it's just a matter of going to their meeting to invite these families or collaborating with them. Maybe, and that's an easy goal, right? You can easily do that in a month. Goal number 2, we want to, over the course of the next school year, find an event or a couple of events that the families might be interested in getting involved with and plan something with them. Then the stretch goal would be our PTA or our PTSA is going to learn about the families at our school and adapt our group culture so that we can build some trust with them. And then within 3 years, right, because you want to give yourself time, we're going to, and put some numbers to it, we're going to find 5 new members from this community and invite them to come to our group. And the important part, retain them. It's not a checkbox. You want, what are you going to do to make sure that they stay? This is just one example. I've got a couple others. Hopefully one of these will help. Okay, there's no BIPOC educators at our school. And it's similar to what Ronnie said, except it's the educators. Now you may get some pushback. You may get some people who say, well, that's okay, because there's not a lot of children of color at our school, and our school is very small. So why would we worry about this? So what would your PTA or your PTSA say? And I know that there's been some language set out by the PTA or the PTSA about this. And so I know that more than likely the response is, having diverse educators is not just to benefit children of color. There's research that shows that all children benefit by having diverse educators. Okay, so a goal might be, we want to advocate at our school to hire these educators in the next months because it's important to all children. Another goal might be, we're gonna think of 3 ways to encourage and support educators seeking jobs to come to our school. And that this will probably require some collaboration with your school leadership, because they may be going out trying to recruit, and it's just a matter of figuring out where and is that strategy working. Maybe another goal would be, we're going to meet with the school staff and find out from them what the barriers are to recruiting, hiring, and retaining the staff, and then collaborate with the school to reduce this. I can't even speak English anymore. This one may require a cultural shift at the school, because it's like when you join a job and it's a toxic environment. It may be the case that, you know, educators have heard that the school is not a positive or supportive environment, and there are things that PTA or PTSA can do to help encourage that. Now, it requires that your school is willing to collaborate with you, and I know some of you are in situations where that's not always the case. Okay, so here's one that may hit a little bit closer to home. So our PTA or our PTSA has very little diversity. Your pushback may be, well, our school is not very diverse, so why do we need to worry about that? And again, I think your PTA or your PTSA may say, because this isn't just about benefiting the people who are people of color or the underrepresented people at the school. We all benefit from having as much diversity and as much inclusion as possible. Easy goal would be, well, let's go find those families, the small group of families at our school, and invite them and have a conversation with them. Let's create some guidelines so we can safely invite students to share their voice. And I've seen this happen at some schools where they say, okay, we don't have a lot of diversity, but we have this group of diverse students, and so let's have them join our leadership team. Let's include them, and we can start from there. And you know, families want to come see their kids. So if you put their kids in a leadership position, the families are going to want to come see their kids shine. We want to meet with the school staff and community groups, especially outside of your school. Let's go find some community groups and collaborate with them and tell them we're recruiting. We are in recruiting mode. We want to welcome these families. Can you tell us about some families who are very interested in education or very curious about, you know, our group, and can we do something? And I think it's great to invite them as a group, because then it's strength in numbers, right? So you don't feel so alone or so scared if you see other people. Then a stretch goal might be, let's look at our practices, right? Let's look at ourselves first to make sure that our group has a welcoming and culturally responsive climate for our families. And I'll circle back to say, when we do diversity, equity, and inclusion work, we always have to look at ourselves first before we start saying, okay, who's responsible for this problem? We have to first say, well, how am I responsible for this problem? Because that's important. Okay, so here's another opportunity for you to practice some DEI. I know that you have changes in leadership. You've got elections. So here's a little homework assignment for your group to discuss. How can you practice some diversity, equity, and inclusion in your upcoming elections? And that might be your action plan, your first item on your action plan for April, depending on when your elections are. Okay, so you've heard me talk for a really long time, and I don't want to put you to sleep. This isn't perfect work. It's evolving. It's about increasing trust and love and awareness. What questions do you have? What do you need for your April meeting? Oh, I just realized I missed. No, that's right. Denver Council PTSA. Okay, so Agnes had suggested that if you need additional help, you can email her, you can email the group, and they will help. But now is a good time for you all. And again, if someone can help me with the chat, because well, actually, let me see. Yeah, so I can end there, and I can and now I can actually see the chat. What questions do you have? what do you need to get your group to April? How can I help you?
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. This has been very informative, and think I've got a path for Crystal and I to follow before the April meeting. It's something that we've always came back to at our local unit regarding trust building and how we approach different members of our community. And we have a very diverse community, and we try and we still get very, very limited traction, it seems. And we have had some people drop into our meetings, and they have stuck around for a couple meetings, and then they find their way out. And I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for how we might do a better job of being more welcoming or fostering more trust, and hopefully trying to continue to build bridges, because again, this is something that I've been working on at my local unit for 4 years now, and we have not cracked that code.
The people who leave, have you ever had an opportunity to ask them why they didn't stick around?
I can't say as I have. There was one parent who was enthusiastic, made it to several months worth of meetings, kept agreeing to take on more responsibilities. I was worried that she was going to burn herself out, because anybody who's been on a PTSA knows you will bury yourself if you don't put some boundaries up for how much you choose to take on. And my suspicion is that she realized that there was a lot of weight to lift. And as she kept asking for more, I think that she maybe realized that she got in a little bit deeper than she wanted to. But yeah, it's a very good idea. We should absolutely be following up with her and asking her exactly why. We haven't seen her in a couple months. And, I mean, for all of this in COVID era, it's really hard to kind of keep personal tabs on these relationships. People show up for a meeting. There are numerous faces that I will never know from this meeting because video wasn't on. I would have no idea who any of you are outside of this meeting. And I probably would have a hard time making a real connection with any of you based on, a 45-minute meeting where 20 minutes was me talking about the budget, and then us talking about, the upcoming fundraiser. And then, because again, our meetings are such that we have the structure, and it doesn't necessarily always lend itself for personal connections. And hopefully mass mandates being removed are a pro and a con, in my opinion. But I think that we're going to have our first in-person meeting at Dora Moore. Yeah, in a really long time. And I'm optimistic that if we're in the school, a lot of parents, Crystal was one of these parents. She came in during COVID. She never even got inside our school. It was over a year that she had 3 kids attending our school and had never seen the inside of our school. And so I hate to make excuses for our shortcomings, but I also, like you said, am giving ourselves some grace, knowing that the remoteness of our actions and what PTSA means to a lot of people is the community and the connectedness. And that's very difficult to achieve on a Zoom meeting once a month. So
I was just going to throw out, Craig,
Oh.
that just, when I was very active in the local unit, my kids are in their 40s and 30s. But we saw a significant decline in people coming to our meetings. And this was, in person, baby boomers generation. But one of the things that I changed when I became president was that we always had the first 15, 20 minutes were an educational seminar, if you will. For example, having the school psychologist come in and talk about what's the latest things going on. I remember another one that brought in a huge crowd was we were changing the testing. I don't remember what the test used to be called, but they got changed. We actually got speakers from CDE to come in and talk about the new testing. So just maybe find out from your community, what are the hot topics for them? And maybe have the first 15, 20 minutes on that hot topic, whether it's bullying or anyhow.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm sorry, I
Ronnie,
was
you're
just-
on mute. Yeah.
Okay. I think what I was going to say is that what I've learned over the years, because I know that being in a marginalized group, oftentimes what tends to happen is, you know, there was a time where Black parents would show up, but they're no longer showing up. And a lot of it comes from, you know, something that Craig was talking about is a lack of trust or systems of schooling failing them and failing us incredibly. And so oftentimes I find what works for me and what I tend to do is when you invite people, give them something to do. When we're able to be in person and have meetings in person, give people something to do. Like somebody may want to be responsible for giving handouts. Somebody may want to be responsible, like if the occasion arises where there's food available. Somebody may want to help with making sure that everybody gets fed. You know, there are different things that can be done, because I think oftentimes when people feel like we're going to be busy doing something, they want to come and be a part of it, because everybody wants to feel validated. They want to feel value, you know, and being a part of an experience. And, you know, I've found for myself personally, you know, oftentimes I am the only person of color in a lot of situations. And I think for me, because, you know, I have friends and different people asking me all the time, well, Ronnie, why do you keep going? Why do you keep showing up? And I usually say, because, you know, at some point it's going to stick. It's going to stick at some point. And from a personal standpoint, I'm pretty hard-headed. And being the fact that I'm pretty hard-headed, you know, there's a lot that you have to do to make me say, I'm not going to be a part of this. And also, I just think about the fact that not just that I have 4 kids, but as a collective, all children, I wouldn't say belong to us, but they're our gifts. And we have a responsibility to make them feel like they're not just a part of the educational process, but they're a part, they deserve to feel safe and feel welcomed. And if as adults, we can't walk through the door and talk to each other, how can we expect our children to feel safe? They can and they won't. So like I said, for me, it's a responsibility. So even if people may not like me and may not want me there, that's all right, because I'm gonna keep coming, because eventually something's gonna stick, and eventually there's gonna be more people that look like me and more people that look like others. And, you know, I do it from a space of love. It may look like tough love, but it comes from love, always.
Yeah. Thank you, Ronnie. And Craig, I think it would be fascinating. They may not respond to you, but I love reaching out to my staff and saying, okay, I need your honest feedback, because if I'm doing something that's annoying to you, I need to know, otherwise I'm going to keep doing it. And I think they look at me like, we don't believe you. I'm like, no, you've got to tell me. Obviously, you know, please try to tell me respectfully, but it may be fascinating to go back to those individuals who stopped coming and just say, you know, I really want to know what could we do differently to keep you coming, and, you know, to keep you involved. And you never know what they'll say. They may not be honest, but I think you'll know if they're being honest. And I think people appreciate being asked. I think my team has gotten a little bit more the trust. I've been here for a year now, so there's a little bit more trust in that I'm being honest when I tell you that I need your honest feedback, because I cannot make things better for everyone if I don't know what I'm doing to upset, or torment people, not on purpose. It's just, I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it would be fascinating if you do. Let us know, because I think it'd be great to hear. It may be something, sometimes it's as simple as, well, I was spending too much time with the group, and then it's just, well, let's try and limit. Because I think sometimes people also feel like we have such a we want to be useful culture. Like, we're so obsessed with, I've got to be doing something in order to prove my value. I recently read an article about how our culture is so obsessed with, like, the only value we have is by working. Are we working? And it's not really, you can see this. I'm seeing this. I live with my 92-year-old mentor, and I can see her self-esteem declining because she cannot be working, right? Because physically she can't. And I'm trying to tell her a human being's value isn't just in what we produce or I'm not useful to you. I'm like, you don't have to be physically like useful. There's so much wisdom. And I'm watching this for her as someone who's an elder, and I see her decline, and it's very painful. And it makes me realize how our culture is so deeply entrenched in busyness and work productivity, and we are so far removed from honoring people just for being who they are. Let me check the chat. Okay. I can put my email in the chat if people want to have additional conversations. I will be very, very curious to hear how it goes with Dr. Sampson. I know that's going to be your final session. Again, just bring what you have. Bring what you have in April. And I know that I'll tell her, I encouraged everyone to just bring something to the table. It's okay. It's a starting point. Something, an action is better than inaction, always.
Hey, this is Amy. I have such a beginner question that I didn't want to jump in before everybody else, but we just had our board elections really for this past year and for this year over the last few weeks. The PTA didn't really run much last year, and so we're playing some catch up, and I did not attend the earlier sessions, and I would love some context around this plan, and are we turning something into somebody?
I was going to say it's more like what we're doing is more like giving people the information and how to get started with your DEI work. And then as we give people information, what this session tonight is for doing is going back to your individual unit, talking to them and creating a plan for your individual school. And as you create the plan for your individual school, a lot of it is about doing reflective work. A lot of it is about doing action-oriented work, like, okay, what things can we do to bring people in from it? That's all right. That's all right. I got 4. It's okay. It's okay. It is all right. I am not mad. I love the babies.
It was a little My Little Pony update.
That's all right. That's all right. Let them make as much noise as they need to. Yeah. But I was going to say that's kind of what it's about. It's about bringing the information back to your group, sitting down, looking at the questions, answering these questions. And it's a little bit of a homework, but what it is more so than anything is it's creating a plan. So what you do is you create small goals, medium goals, and larger goals. And the larger goals are over years, but the smaller goals start with taking maybe a month or so. And then the medium-sized goal, you plan out for the year and say, okay, these are the things that we're going to do to make sure that we welcome in diverse groups of people, families, and otherwise, so we can have a diverse group. You know what I mean? Because a lot of times people start off with questions, and I hope I'm answering these correctly, Dr. Hernandez. I hope so. Am I doing okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah, and Amy,
yeah.
send an email to denvercouncilptsa.org. We
Yeah.
are an email away, and we are ready to come to you, whatever you need from us. You said it's Trevista,
Mhm.
and I know you have a very diverse community in the first place.
Yes.
I mean,
Very diverse community.
you're probably
and-
one of the few integrated schools in DPS, as far as I'm concerned. So,
And in fact, I would argue global majority with not very many of me. And I will, I do want to note that I have a co-chair who is going to try and join us tonight, Vince, because I was not willing to chair the DEI committee alone as a white woman. And so a Latino is my co-chair, which helps a lot. And I feel
But
like
you know what? The power is in the willingness to do it.
Yep.
That's the
Yep.
power. The power is in the willingness to do it. Sometimes we get so caught up in it has to be this, that, or the other. And yes, we do want diverse groups of people, but you can't get diverse groups of people if you don't start the work with you. Because I know that just because I'm the DEI chair doesn't mean I don't have work to do, honey. I have work to do every day and twice on Sunday. So what I'm saying to you is that as our president Anya said, we're here and we're here to help, and we're here to help folks move forward, because that's what it is we want to do. So don't ever think that just because I'm this way, I can't help to bring those changes about, because we all can.
Yeah.
Because the thing about diversity, the beauty in diversity is we're all diverse in our own way, because we all have different opinions, different thoughts, different ways of doing things. And that's what makes us diverse, because it makes us all rich in what it is we bring to the. We become not diverse when we all think everybody has to do everything the same way. Nobody is like that.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
would say the concrete first step, Amy, is, I would just say the first concrete step. Are you on the board now, or are you an officer of your local unit?
I'm on the DCPTSA and co-chair of the diversity DEI committee.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like you've got a
That's great,
president, a treasurer. I would say that'd be your first concrete steps. I hope we'll have this recording available within a week. We'll be sending out an email Monday, Tuesday.
And would it be helpful for me, it's you, because you all did send out the previous 2 recordings. Would it be helpful for me to review those from
we'll be
September, November?
redistributing that.
Okay.
We actually have already sent some of the recordings out in a newsletter last month, but our goal is to get a newsletter out no later than Tuesday. So I would say the first concrete step is they ask your officers, look out for an email from Denver Council PTSA. They're going to have links to the previous recordings, previous handouts. I'm really excited about this. What do you think about this? And I would suggest that you got to get your board to buy in, because otherwise you're going to be button heads. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and they're on board 100%, as is the principal, So,
Great job.
Wonderful.
Great job.
And Amy,
thank you all so much.
we will be having a 4th session in April,
Okay.
as we've mentioned so far. And so going back and through the first 2 sessions, I think we've been slowly building. And so our first session was really just an introduction of what DEI work looks like, why it's important, and how you know you can start to get involved. The second, Dr. Hernandez went through basically a lot of the language and understanding of how groups can be diverse, and trying to better understand those differences between us, and so that you can perhaps feel more empowered to have those conversations with people who you may not be as familiar with, but not feeling quite so intimidated by starting that conversation, because you do have a little bit of a background from that second session. And then today we're giving you the plan to put in place, like how you can start it. And then we'll wrap it all up in April, and you can come back and we can actually go over what the plan is, and hopefully set something in motion for your school so that you guys can have a foundation to start building something greater.
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then
the
PTA
timing,
also has.
I was just going to say the
National
timing was
PTA.
awesome.
It is.
Right.
And National PTA has got a lot of awesome resources as well.
Oh,
So,
okay,
and
great.
take it, I mean, you pay membership dues. They've been developing these for,
Yeah.
10, 15 years. So, and so the stuff from National PTA is free. So I'm always pushing that, like, take advantage of the free stuff.
Mhm.
Awesome. The timing was great. We had finished our officer elections a few days before you all sent out this email. And so, and it's a brand new DEI committee and brand new co-chair. So I was glad to find you all, and apologize for joining you a few months late into the year, but thanks for answering basic questions, and I'll look forward to April.
Fantastic. Great. Is there anybody else before we sign off that you've got a question, or, and I can put my email in the chat just in case. But again, my full-time job is running this pre-collegiate program, and I really want, I said this before in our planning meeting, but thank you for the work that you are doing. I know it's hard, but I think it's so important when I hear schools struggling, and I say, but you've got to get more allies, right? You've got to, and that's what I love about your response, Amy, is that share the work. Ally work, I like, and this is why I love working with Dr. Sampson, because it's so much better. It's so much rich material when you have somebody to partner with. And this idea that we have to do it alone, it doesn't work in innovation work. It doesn't work in the business world. It does not work in DEI work. This is collaborative. It really is. And I think when you share the pain and share the joys of the successes of seeing those families come in and welcoming them, and being the voice for those families who don't. I always think about, I have the privilege of having education, so it is my responsibility to always think about the families that don't. So I can't just advocate for me, for myself, for my students. I'm always thinking about, the families who don't speak English, or who are afraid to come to the school, or have come to the school and have had a horrible experience and never want to come back. And so I think the work that you do is so important. And so it's been my privilege to try and offer something that I hope will be useful to you as you move to the session in April.
Dr. Hernandez, I want to say thank you so much. This has been a true blessing to know that we can work together and make the changes that really need to happen, because I think that when we as adults are willing to step into doing the deep DEI work and to do the deep reflective work, what it does is it creates a groundswell. And our children watch what we do, and they tend to emulate it. And if we can be an example, and what I think of the PTA as, because I know when I was a little girl and when I was in school, my mother and father weren't able to be a part of the PTA because they worked so much. So I was, what do they call it, a latchkey kid, if you will, because I had to watch and take care of my brother and sister. But the thing that I will say is, since I've become an adult and had children for myself, it really has been a blessing to see that the changes can be made, although, changes do move slowly. It's just a blessing to have people like you that are willing to come in and help us move forward with this work, because I always think of Joanne and the conversations that we had and the things that we talked about, and God rest her soul. She's not with us anymore. But just the fact that she said, Ronnie, this is something that we need to do, and it needs to move forward because we need to make these changes so people see that we're more than just a homogeneous group. We're a group of a lot of different types of people. And so I want to honor it and do this work in honor of her. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I think It's been wonderful sharing some of this evening with you all. I hope I will run into you in person if you're ever up in the Springs or I'm up in Denver. Feel free to reach out, and I hope you have a great evening. And I'll hear from Dr. Sampson how that last session went. But unless there's other questions, I think we should close it out so people can rejoin their families and have dinner and all of that good stuff.
Sweet dreams, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez.
Yeah. Buenas noches. Have a good night, everyone.
Buenas noches.
Adios.